The views and opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of Natural Bridges Media or KSQD's staff, volunteers, or underwriters.
Hello and welcome to Talk of the Bay. I am your host, Len B.A., and my guest today is Daniel Savio. He is musician, music director, and resident composer and lyricist for the San Francisco Mime Troupe. Daniel is a member of the Mime Troupe's artistic collective. He's the company's resident lyricist, composer, and musical director. Daniel has been with the troupe since 2015 as a musician and has been writing songs for the company since 2019, including those in this year's new original musical, Breakdown. Daniel Savio, welcome to Talk of the Bay.
Thank you so much, Len.
The Mime Troupe is going to be in Santa Cruz Saturday and Sunday coming up, performing your latest production, Breakdown. The Mime Troupe has been putting on free performances for over 60 years. My big brother took me to see a performance in a Berkeley park about 55 years ago when I was about to start high school. You have an enormous legacy, and much of it is based in that Commedia dell'Arte tradition, and all of it is grounded in social justice. You use music and satire to communicate about often very complex issues. I'd like to dive into the past at some point, but to begin, could you tell us about the current production that our listeners can catch this Saturday or Sunday at London Nelson Center?
Yeah, Breakdown is the story of people living in the Tenderloin on the street and the indignities that they're subjected to, but also the agency that they are trying to exercise in their own lives. And then also the people who are trying to help them and the people who are maybe exploiting the situation as well. And we get to see the usual Mime Troupe sort of heroes and villains. In this case, it's Fox News correspondent, and we have also a social worker. You can guess which side is which there. And we get to see, a bit of drama where we fall in love with these characters very quickly, I hope. And the hijinks that they get into plays out with song and dance and exciting costuming and sets that transform before your eyes. So it's the Mime Troupe.
Yeah, and I discovered that you have available some little excerpts of a couple of the songs, and I wondered if I could play. There's one song you wrote, Look Me in the Eye, and there's a little excerpt of that. It's a rough recording, but I wondered if I could play that for our audience.
Yeah, so this song, this was recorded during our 6-week writing and rehearsal process in May and June. Where we put together the show as quickly as possible for the reason of being able to keep it as up to the minute relevant as possible and make sure that we're addressing the issues that people have fresh in their minds. And this song, we have Yume, a young woman who is living on the street, and she is trying to get some help, and people just ignore her.
Right. So here is part of Look Me in the Eye from Breakdown.
Spare change? Spare change?
So I tell her, I said, Margaret, if you don't sign the lease, I will.
Excuse me?
What kind of fool lets a 2-bedroom, 2.5 bath in Bernal Heights slip through their fingers?
Spare change?
The value is only gonna go up when all the old tenants get moved out.
Hey, lady!
It's up on Folsom.
You see me, I see you see me, but you walk on by. I just need a couple bucks.
Near the park.
You hear me? I know you hear me, but there's no reply. I'm just a couple of quarters.
Beautiful view of the bay.
Every day you see me, do you look me in the eye? You could say hello and let me know you don't want me to die. With some change, or just a smile, or a book, or even chat a while. Say sorry, I can't today.
And
I see you, see me, don't look the other way.
Yeah, don't look the other way. I mean, that's, it's here we have, of course, anyone who is ever out in public in Santa Cruz or any other city really in the U.S. We all encounter people who do not have a place to live other than on the street. And after a while, it seems, I know for me, I get conditioned to look the other way a lot. And to bring these people to life in this story is a way to really touch on those issues in a different, very humane way.
Well, since we started working on this, I've become sort of hyper aware of my own behavior in that regard. And yeah, a lot of the time, of course, as we all do, I walk on by without making eye contact. And I'm really trying not to do that, and I hope that we all can sort of take that lesson. Not that we are the only people talking about this issue. Far from it, right? This is very much the issue of the day, or one of the issues of the day. What the Mime Troupe does is try to connect things up. So the show is not only about that, right? And the title is part of that too. There's multiple meanings here. There is a personal breakdown that is occurring or that has occurred, and there's also sort of the societal breakdown, the breakdown of the social contract, and how people's needs are not being taken care of, and how the society is organized in such a way that fundamentally disregards human need in favor of greed.
Yeah, and the Mime Troupe has been great at connecting the dots, to recognize the connections between these issues, economic and social and cultural and historical going on. That I've always enjoyed the performances myself, and so if you're a listener who has never seen the San Francisco Mime Troupe, take advantage. One of the things about the Mime Troupe's performances is they're free. Like, you don't have to worry about, can I afford to go to this? Yes, you can afford to go to it. It'll be at 3 p.m. both Saturday afternoon and Sunday afternoon at London Nelson Park. That's the space in back of London Nelson Center outside. So outside also, very COVID safe. So I guess it bears repeating. I obviously, having seen the Mime Troupe, have heard this story before, but could you explain, a lot of people associate with the word mime with like silent pantomime, and could you explain the source of the name?
Yeah, so the word mime comes from a Greek root that is the same as the word mimic or mimicry, and so that's what the Mime Troupe does, is we're making fun of the social and political villains, so to speak, through the use of sort of well-known stock characters, and it's the same as the old back and forth of oh no, who will pay the rent? I'll pay the rent. You must pay the rent, right? And this is the Commedia dell'Arte roots of the Mime Troupe. It's a old Italian theatrical style that we've adapted to the modern day over the decades, and it was very, very tonally appropriate in the 60s, and it's remained remarkably fresh and relevant as the political times have changed. Like, you know, as a lot of people have noted, it's much harder to write political satire now than it once was, because the reality is so ridiculous, and so it's difficult to come across as ridiculous enough without perhaps crossing the line into too ridiculous, I suppose. So the Mime Troupe tries to straddle that, but I think we also include a lot of other elements too. This show, in my opinion, is very moving, and perhaps more moving than some other Mime Troupe shows. Every show is not the same, although we do have a particular style that is our own.
Yeah, and the Mime Troupe is a collective. You work very collaboratively, and the playwrights for this piece, for Breakdown, did you see the script first and then develop the songs, or was it kind of a back and forth? How did that process work?
Well, it's more like, before I can write a song, I need to see at least the script for that part. I don't necessarily have the whole script before I've started writing some of the songs. So it's really maybe when we start rehearsals, we have maybe half of the script, and then the rest of it gets written as we're in rehearsals. And part of the rehearsal process as the collective, and with the rest of our company, which includes people who are not necessarily in the collective, we have political discussions where we figure out as a group, what is it we're really trying to say here. A common criticism of the Mime Troupe is that we are lecturing people or telling people what to think. I don't think it's true that we're telling people what to think. We're telling people what we think, and we have to figure that out. So we have meetings where we're just talking, you know, not necessarily talking about the show itself, but just talking about the issues.
Yeah, and 90% of talk radio and probably a very significant portion of TV is people telling other people what they think. We don't consider that coercion necessarily. Obviously, it can be influence. But I love your point about the difficulty of writing satire when the reality seems like it could be a satire. It's tricky to make it come across where you really realize, oh, this is making fun. This is exaggerating. It's hard to exaggerate what's very exaggerated already. And you've been involved in this process now for 7 or 8 years of writing music with the Mime Troupe. Have you seen a change just in that time, or is it more like relative to, say, the 1980s?
Yeah, perhaps relative to before I came into the company. The voice of our head, the artistic voice of our head writer, Michael Gene Sullivan, is very specific, and I think well adapted to these times, where we're not necessarily looking for a happy ending in every show, but we look for the endings that most perfectly drive home the point that we're trying to make. So sometimes that means a show has a really well-defined ending. Sometimes that means just the show might have sort of an open ending where you don't necessarily know what's going to happen next. Which is not to say that those specifics are different from what Mime Troupe shows were in the past, but I think Michael's style is so vibrant and shines through in such a way that today's shows feel like today's shows largely because of his voice. That's my opinion. I don't know if everybody would agree with that. Probably if I said that in a Mime Troupe meeting, a lot of people would argue with me.
A true collective. Yeah.
But we're good friends also. It's the company is professional, but also a great group of friends.
Yeah, and I had the privilege of having Michael Gene Sullivan on this program just last year, prior to the show here in Santa Cruz last year. And yeah, I was really taken with how quick he is and how on point. Like I could ask a question that I thought would be leading in one direction, and he would immediately grab on to what he felt was the real point that needed to be made. And that level of clarity and consistency is really appreciated. And I also have loved in seeing the performances that there are surprises. Like it isn't fully predictable, and it is, it's musical theater that's satirical, and it's something we don't get quite enough of, in modern life, especially now that so much musical theater has become oftentimes very serious. And obviously not satirical if it's done as a serious play with music in it. So really refreshing to see those performances. So as you do this creative process, you get a scene, you get a character introduced, you have to write a song for that character's voice. Have you ever had to do research? I mean, do you feel like, or are you simply just getting feedback from the rest of the troupe in terms of developing those songs?
No, there's definitely research that I've done for particular songs. Also, the writers have done research and they pass it on to me, and that makes my job a lot easier. So, for example, one of the songs in this year's show speaks about the history of the Tenderloin, and we get really specific. And but I did not do that particular research. But there was a song in last year's show that was talking about public-private partnerships between the government and corporations. And for that song, I did quite a bit of research so that I could include real examples within the lyrics. Maybe not explain the whole situation, but real examples. And then if the audience wants to go look up that particular thing that I referenced, they'll see that it's a real thing that I was talking about. That's sometimes also the up to the minute thing that I was talking about before. We'll try to include things in the script and the lyrics that are talking about things that happened the week before we opened, so that people are just blown away by us talking about this thing that just happened. But it does make it challenging also to write.
Yeah, and there's got to be examples almost every week that point to the same issue. So yeah,
absolutely. And in some years, we find while we're in the process, something happens in the news that reaffirms for us that we're talking about the right thing, that this is the thing the show should be about this year. And I think this year that's true, as well as it has been in some other years, for sure. Yeah. We see routinely kind of media manipulation of the message about San Francisco, talking about how dangerous San Francisco has become, and how liberal policies are destroying it. But that's not really true. In fact, the statistics show that San Francisco is less dangerous than other large cities, despite the hype around that.
Yeah, it's interesting that association, particularly, I mean, speaking to the issue of homelessness, the association of homelessness with crime, and I won't say there's no truth to it. We certainly have a petty theft issue going on in Santa Cruz, which one could trace largely to addiction, and a lot of that addiction is on the streets. But it doesn't really correspond to, serious, dangerous, life-threatening crime at all.
No.
And
the
statistics prove that. Yeah.
And really, it's those people living on the street are the subjected to much greater risk and danger than the rest of us because of them.
Yeah. Well, I want to welcome any listeners who have just tuned in recently, and tell you, if you didn't know, that my guest is Daniel Savio. He's a member of the San Francisco Mime Troupe's artistic collective, the company's resident lyricist, composer, and musical director. So Daniel, you've worked on a number of different shows. I wonder if there's other music you would be interested in sharing with the audience that you were involved with.
I think we may have some recordings from last year that was back to the way things were, and if we heard that song, maybe that sort of highlights the difference in styles. It's still mime troupe, but each mime troupe show is a little different. Back to the way things were was really based on sitcoms, like specifically like The Honeymooners, whereas this year's show is a little bit more of a psychological thriller, Hitchcock or something like that, perhaps.
Yeah, I love the different plot constructions. So here's the title song from Back to the Way Things Were from 2022.
We're going back.
We're going back.
We're going back to the way things were.
Back to the life we knew.
Back to the fun-filled, sun-filled days before this endless night we've all been through. We don't want the world to change, just give us the tried and true. We're going back to the way things were for me and you. We're going back to the way things were.
Back to what used to be.
Back to convenience and routine. They're coming soon, I guarantee. We don't want to change the world. We're American and free.
We're going back to the way things were.
Back to the way things were. We're going back to the way things were for you and me.
And that was a perfect, late COVID song, back to the way things were. Like, oh yeah, we're all going to return to normal now. And with this sense of normal as being, whatever was current or whatever we took for granted in 2019. And great satire in that program.
Thank you. Yeah, that one was fun. And that one started as a half-hour radio program that we did during the time when we couldn't be in the parks. And then we expanded it into the full hour park show last year. So the radio version is still available on our website. So if you go listen to that, you can hear sort of the short version. The expanded version has, other songs but you had to be there. It's live theater.
Yeah, it's always great to experience it as live theater, and we're fortunate to have quite a bit of live theater here in Santa Cruz. Well, we got even more this weekend with San Francisco Mime Troupe, Saturday and Sunday both, 3 p.m. shows of their new production Breakdown at London Nelson Park in Santa Cruz.
And at 2:30, the band plays a set of music that they've prepared too. So there's live music and then the show at 3.
Right. So it's like a picnic afternoon. You can go hang out,
Yes.
have music, and there are often other people around, with organizations or food trucks or whatever. It seems to vary depending on the location.
Depending on the venue. Yeah, that's another thing about the Mime Troupe. Every place that we play is different. As opposed to most shows, they get installed into a theater and then they sit there for 40 performances. Instead, we go around to a whole lot of different places, parks all over the Bay Area, a few indoor theaters in places where we couldn't do it in a park. A couple times maybe we do it in the troupe's backyard in the Mission. And so depending on where you are, there will probably be a show near you. And you can look at our full schedule on the website. I should also say that we had a canceled show. July 27th was canceled in Mill Valley, and it's been rescheduled for August 30th. So anybody in Marin, there is a show still going to happen up there August 30th.
Great. And what's the Mime Troupe's website so people can take a look at that schedule?
That's www.sfmt.org.
Easy, 4 letters, SFMT. Great. Good. Now, listening to that song reminded me, there's a nice arrangement in there where you kind of go back and forth with, more emphasis of one instrument kind of soloing and then the whole ensemble going. Do you do the arrangements as well as write the songs?
For the most part, there's some interplay between writers, directors, and the musicians. So I get to hear what they're trying out. That maybe gives me some ideas that I then play with and then give back to them, and they play around with that some more. So that's a collaborative process as well. Now, sometimes also the shape, the structure of the music is really guided by the structure of the script. I might write a chunk of lyrics and then we split it up a little bit and have some dialogue interspersed with the lyrics. I really like that when the music and the story are kind of woven together as opposed to one stopping and the next one starting. So it's fun to do that as well, and that's also part of that collaborative process. We have, the actors might have a little bit of input as well, because they can tell us most viscerally where the emotional impact feels the strongest, and that's usually where you want them to start singing. When the emotions become so heightened that they can't just talk it, they have to start singing.
Yeah, great. It's musical theater is so distinct, and I know you've also played. You've worked with other theater companies. You've worked with Berkeley Playhouse, Marin Musical Theater Company, half a dozen others. How is it different for you if you're just performing, music in a musical setting, a musical performance setting, versus doing music for a play where you have actors and you have dialogue and it's mixed in like that?
Yeah. Well, for one thing, in a play, you have to be very aware of your volume. You can't play too loud. The words need to be heard. The words are the most important thing. Sometimes people ask, what's the difference between a musical and an opera? And although there's many different opinions on this, the way that I like to say it is that a musical is a theater production that is using music to heighten the drama. An opera is a music production that is using drama as a vehicle for the music. So in the Mime Troupe or in basically any theater production that I do, the point is the story and the characters, and although the music is important too, it can't draw attention away from where the attention really needs to be. So that the audience gets caught up in the right things, not maybe so focused on that high note was so beautiful or that drum pattern was so incredible, but focused on the lover's relationship or the tragedy befalling our hero, or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Wow. Your father, Mario Savio, was a principal leader in the free speech movement in the early 60s at UC Berkeley and gained some notoriety from that because he made some really moving speeches. some of which I've heard recordings of. And it was a real milestone in the beginning of the political movements of the 60s. How did your father influence your perspective, and has that related to your choice to work with the mime troupe?
In several ways, I would say. First off, unlike a lot of people, I've never separated from my parents' belief system. I still think they were right. That's why I'm with the mime troupe, because I still agree with the radical progressive socialist politics. And although I haven't become an activist except in that I work with the mime troupe, but that's where my little bit of activism is in writing songs for shows that are about the issues of the day. But Mario was influenced himself in several ways, not the least of which was by the images he saw as a child during World War II of the Nazi death camps, and seeing those images of bodies and realizing this was how he put it, realizing that if this was real, then he had been lied to at some point about the very nature of humanity, if people were really capable of doing that. But what he drew from that wasn't then that humans are innately terrible or something like that. Instead, what he drew from that was that we have to come together as people. That the driving force of his spirituality that was passed to me was the idea that human community is the thing that we should be organizing our lives around, helping each other, and that came also from his Catholic upbringing, as well as from what he saw both as a child and then later when he was in Mississippi in the Freedom Summer in 1964, right before FSM, and what he saw in Mississippi while he was there trying to help register Black folks to vote, also very much shaped his understanding of America and then mine, and both he and my mother, who was also involved in FSM, made sure that I was exposed to the real facts about race and class and gender in the United States and the world, to the extent one can. Right, you're also part of the society that you're being raised in, and you're still inundated with all the propaganda that everybody else is. I'm not immune to that, but yeah, I got this sort of broad strokes approach, all of that. And they were good parents, I think, too. I love them very much.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I appreciate you sharing that. We're going to take a really short break, and we'll be right back and continue our interview with Daniel Savio right after this. Welcome back to Talk of the Bay. If you're just tuning in, my guest is Daniel Savio. He is a member of the San Francisco Mime Troupe's artistic collective, and he is the company's resident lyricist, composer, and musical director. Daniel, you've put together with some other folks, you created a theater piece about the free speech movement. And that happened in 2014, I understand. And I wondered if you could talk about the experience of putting that together, what inspired you, and how that story came across as a theater piece.
Yeah, so that was for the 50th anniversary of the free speech movement. it was at a company called Stagebridge, which is in Oakland, and that Stagebridge is a seniors theater company. So I don't actually remember whose idea it was. It might have been mine, but I can't quite remember. It might have been mine. It might have been my mom's. It might have been one of the people running the company at the time, or it might have been Joan Holden or Bruce Barthel, who are they were the head writer and head resident composer of the Mime Troupe for years before Michael joined, and before years later I joined. And they wrote FSM with me. Bruce and I were co-songwriters. So it could have been one of their ideas. I actually don't remember. But yeah, the idea was to write a musical about FSM. It was a big learning process for me because I had never written anything that long. And involved with all these different moving parts. A musical is a big undertaking, and I learned a great deal from working with Bruce. Absolutely, and we miss him. We miss him very much. I think the overall thing worked pretty well because Stagebridge is the kind of company that it is. We tried to structure the story in such a way where it was talking not just about the students then, but also where they had gone in life since FSM as well, because we wanted there to be a multi-generational aspect to the play. So we get flashes of the characters that we meet them as when they're in their 20s or something, as students in 1964. And then we also see them in 2014 and see where did their careers go? Did they go into the field that they were studying, or did they go somewhere else? And each character's story was a little different. And so for that show, one of the songs that I wrote is a musicalization of my father's famous speech that he gave from on top of a police car, where he's talking about putting your bodies on the gears so that you can stop the machine of the system that you know is wrong. The speech can be heard online. The song cannot.
Has that play been in production since?
No, I don't think so.
Uh-huh.
And we talked about revising it. I think we started working on a revision. We were going to change a number of things and maybe add songs, take away songs, but that never happened. And that is the story in musical theater. You never know. These projects take so long to come to fruition, and so many things have to go right that it's very, very easy for something just not to work for whatever reason, and then people go off and get involved in other projects and never come back to it.
And there's always other projects. Yeah.
Yes.
So the Mime Troupe is, obviously out there trying to direct, people's attention towards major political and social issues and give them, avenues of action and participation. And the Mime Troupe also functions as a collective organization that's very diverse. How do you see that relationship and that interaction between sort of the mission of the Mime Troupe and the way it functions as an organization?
Yeah. Well, it's very important within our organization that it is not top down. There's no hierarchy. There are no junior members of the Mime Troupe collective. Once you're in the collective, you have the same voice that everybody else has, which means that sometimes things are harder to get done. It also means that some things are easier to get done, things that you need help with. you've got an organization of people who are ready to help when it's something that we are all able to see is important, something that we want to work on. So we say we're fighting capitalism one musical comedy at a time, and one of these days we're going to get it right.
Yeah, the perfect formula there. When you come up with that, I want to sign on.
Well, come see it this weekend. You can tell us if we got it this year.
Yeah, thank you. You happen to have gotten your music degree at UC Santa Cruz, and we're broadcasting here in the Monterey Bay Area. As you have, you've been living in the Bay Area, since, well, at least for many years, since the time you got your degree. When you come back to Santa Cruz, do you notice changes since you lived here? And do you have any observations you would share and that might be relevant?
Yeah. Now, I should say that most of the time that I was there, I was living on campus at UC. And certainly I noticed changes on the campus, but it's still one of the most beautiful places to go to school, regardless of any changes there. But the town has certainly changed. And I mean, most obviously, I think when you walk down Pacific, a lot of the places that were sort of the character of it are no longer there. And it's taken on a character that is more serving those with money rather than serving the community as a whole. I feel a little weird saying that as somebody who doesn't actually live there now. So, maybe somebody who is there might feel differently. And I know that the community is not a monolith. I'm sure people have different opinions about how things have changed there.
Yeah. But I mean, we know statistically that, a lot of artists have left the community because it became unaffordable. We know statistically that we have more chain stores and that kind of thing instead of locally owned businesses. And, as somebody who's lived here pretty much continuously for 53 years, I can corroborate that, in fact, there is some, what I call the caramelization going on of the town, where it's being dressed up for spenders as opposed to just being fixed up for the needs of the local people. And that's a different way of approaching it. So and I think that's very much what our show this year is about as well. Or that is another thing that our show is about this year. And we talk about how using the Tenderloin as our example, for forever, that was the one place in San Francisco where anybody with a job could afford to live. And even that's changing now. Right. And I assume that probably applies to Santa Cruz too, right? That people are just getting priced out, and it's not just artists, right? It must be many, many people. Certainly, I don't think that I could afford to live there. And I grew up in San Francisco. I had an idea that I wanted to move back to San Francisco, and I don't think that I could afford to live in San Francisco now. I don't see that it is likely to ever really be a possibility. So I wonder, because I don't know too much really about Santa Cruz's specific situation, but I imagine that for a lot of people, it's maybe, they grew up there and now it can't be their home anymore. Yeah, and that's the aspect of gentrification happening in not just around the United States, but many places in the world where, families are frustrated or angry or both that their own children can't afford to stay in the area, depending on where they live. And I've seen that, in places as diverse as Lisbon and Marrakesh and New York City and San Francisco and Seattle. So it's definitely true. And I've spoken with people living on the streets here in Santa Cruz who used to live in a home and were evicted and haven't been able to get back into anything since. So it's definitely an aspect of what is a pretty broad issue right now, with what happens when we prioritize property as an investment as opposed to as shelter.
Yeah, and it seems to get harder every year. And so, yeah, we have in our play, we have a few different characters who relate to that in different ways, right? We have characters who have been living on the street for some time. We have characters who are just arriving at that point in their life, and being shocked by the difficulty that they have in finding any aid. So yeah, it's deeply, deeply troubling. And I hope that we can be drawing some positive attention to the issue.
Yeah, and I love how the Mime Troupe is able to create these settings, the characters, the music, to convey that in a really lively and relatable way. So I, just thank you for your contribution to all of that. It's really quite amazing. If you've just tuned in recently, my guest is Daniel Savio. He is the resident lyricist, composer, and musical director for the San Francisco Mime Troupe. And the Mime Troupe is putting on their new original musical Breakdown in Santa Cruz this Saturday and Sunday at London Nelson Park in Santa Cruz. Music starts at 2:30 and the play starts at 3 o'clock, and it is free. So if you're thinking about, gee, I just spent all that money on Shakespeare tickets, can I afford another play? Well, this one is free, so show up. Daniel, you've done a lot of work with children and youth in theater productions. What do you notice about what do you notice about working with young people that's different from something like the Mime Troupe, where both the performers and the audience are primarily adults?
Sure. Well, actually the difference is not whether they're children or adults. The difference is the level of experience, because working with professional actors, they're just instinctively aware of things in terms of how they face the audience or projecting their voice that you don't have to worry about with kids. But it's about their professional nature, because I'll tell you, it's not so different working with kids with very little experience than it is working with adults with very little experience. The fact that they're adults doesn't actually make the difference. It's whether they've developed the skills or not. But it's also about whether people are really putting in an effort. And so when I have the most fun working with adults or kids, professional or amateur, is when people are working really hard. So even if a kid or an adult, lacks some skills or lacks some understanding of some aspect of what they're doing, if they're trying really hard, it makes everything okay, pretty much. I can work with that. If they're not putting in the effort, then it becomes more difficult. I can't help them if they don't help themselves in that way. The thing that I love about working with kids is that a lot of the time I can get them to try very, very silly things. And a lot of the shows written for kids or that kids get to put on have silly things in them, and that's when you can get a kid to sort of relax and let themselves be silly in front of everybody for fun, it's pretty joyous. When you can't, it can be a little torturous, but hopefully we can get there.
Yeah,
it's funny how you know how to play pretend when you're 5, and then when you're 10, you lose how to do it or something. I don't know. You become very self-conscious is I guess what's really happening.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting phenomenon. And I've certainly seen it, in my times with children too, and participating in any kind of activity. You get to a point where some of the kids just won't do imaginary play, at least around adults that they don't know well.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then when you get professional actors, and they've gone back into it, and they know how to do imaginary play in a really kind of wholehearted way, right? They put everything into it, and that's when you get to have both fun and also opportunities for things being really moving that maybe you don't quite have so much with kids. Not because kids are incapable of it, because they're definitely not, but it's more difficult. And a lot of the time in youth programs, there's a lot of kids, and you don't get to give every one of them the individual attention you would like to. Isn't that the story everywhere?
Yeah. Well, Daniel, you've worked with San Francisco Mime Troupe for almost a decade. What do you like about the work, and what keeps you coming back?
Well, this is one of the only gigs that there is still where you get to write these kind of sort of little Tin Pan Alley songs in a way. It varies a bit, but Mime Troupe songs tend to be on the short side, because the shows tend to be on the short side, and there's a premium of space. So I think because of that, because the Mime Troupe is a place where I get to do that, I don't want to give it up. I don't want to give it up because it's so much fun for me as a lover of musical theater across the broad spectrum. A lot of my friends, other musicians who have sometimes done some theater work, mostly though, what they're doing is they're playing in bands, or they're recording singer-songwriter kind of stuff, or whatever. But it's music for its own sake, and I love that. There's nothing wrong with that, of course. But what I love is the music integrated with the story. And the fact that I get to do it also integrated with something that I really strongly believe in on like a moral, ethical level, and that I feel like is doing something good in the world, and with a team of like-minded individuals, it's too good to give up. It really is.
That's wonderful. We have just a couple of minutes left, and first I want to let our listeners know the San Francisco Mime Troupe will be performing their new play, Breakdown, this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, in London Nelson Park in Santa Cruz. 2:30 is the music starts, and 3 o'clock the play starts, and it is free, so you can come out and just show up. And it will be a wonderful picnic time. If you want to bring food, bring it. There may be food there, I don't know. And Daniel, if you would tell us, please, how to find out more and how to connect with the Mime Troupe, and anything else you'd like to share with our audience before we say goodbye.
Yeah, you can check out information about this year's show and past shows on our website, www.sfmt.org. And you can there's recordings to listen to from what we did in the pandemic. There's you get to look at pictures of posters of the shows going back decades. I think there's also scripts of some of our older shows and maybe some of our newer shows as well. I don't remember everything. There's quite a lot up there.
Yeah, there's actually video recordings of an entire, like last year, all of last year's show, for example.
Oh, is that still up there? Okay, so
Yeah.
there's things that I don't always know
Right.
exactly what we have at any given time. We're also, I should say to our listeners, we are also showing this year's show online. If you can't get to the park, you can watch it online for free, and the link to that is also on the website. And that's through September 4th, so that people who are listening from afar and can't come to Santa Cruz this weekend or San Francisco will still be able to see it. I mean, we have fans around the world, and some of them, that's the only way they get to enjoy the show. So I'm glad that we have had the opportunity to be able to do that.
Daniel Savio, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your creative work as part of the San Francisco Mime Troupe. It's a gift that keeps on giving.
Thank you very much, Len. My pleasure, and it was a pleasure to be here.